The transmission arrived precisely at 3:14 Universal Coordinated Time, cutting through every communication network on the planet with a precision that defied conventional technology. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, chief of the International Xenocommunication Research Center, felt the hair on the back of her neck rise as the holographic display flickered to life in the underground monitoring station. The projection materialized without warning, a crystalline form of impossible geometry, simultaneously angular and fluid. The Xeraxian diplomatic envoy stood nearly 3 meters tall, its body a complex arrangement of obsidian-like segments that seemed to shift and recalibrate with each microscopic movement. 6 jointed limbs terminated in what might charitably be called hands, though they more closely resembled intricate mechanical interfaces. Humanity, the lead diplomat stated, its voice a perfect, emotionless translation that seemed to bypass spoken language entirely. Your species has been evaluated. Surrender is the only logical conclusion. The United Nations Emergency Chamber fell into an unnatural silence. Representatives from every corner of the globe sat frozen, their collective breath caught between disbelief and mounting terror. Screens around the room displayed the same transmission, a visual assault of alien precision that seemed to mock human complexity. Dr. Rodriguez's fingers danced across her quantum interface, analyzing every microsecond of the transmission. Something about the communication felt off. The Xeraxians were broadcasting with such confidence, such absolute certainty of their superiority, that it bordered on performative. She recognized the psychological manipulation technique immediately, a classic intimidation strategy designed to break collective resistance before any actual conflict began. Beside her, Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura, a veteran xenolinguistics expert, leaned closer to the display. His augmented reality glasses flickered, running real-time linguistic and semantic analysis. "They're not just delivering a message," he whispered, "they're performing a ritual of submission." The Xeraxian continued, its crystalline form rotating with mathematical precision. "Your technological capabilities are equivalent to primitive tool users. Your planetary defenses are negligible. Your species has 2 options: complete surrender or total elimination." In that moment, something remarkable happened. Instead of panic, a different emotion began to spread through the human representatives. It started small, a twitch of a smile from the Brazilian delegate, a subtle straightening of the Canadian ambassador's posture, a knowing glance between the Indian and Nigerian representatives. They weren't afraid. They were intrigued. Elena caught the eye of General Marcus Thompson, head of the United Earth Defense Coordination. No words were exchanged, but an entire conversation happened in that single glance. The Xeraxians had made a critical error. They had underestimated humanity's most potent weapon, its capacity for collective, adaptive problem-solving. The transmission continued, a clinical list of demands and projected outcomes. The alien diplomatic corps seemed genuinely unaware of the subtle responses being coordinated in real time across multiple communication channels. Research centers that moments ago seemed disconnected were now synchronizing with mathematical precision. Outside the UN chamber, in research labs, military installations, and university campuses around the world, something was already moving. Not a military mobilization, something far more dangerous. Humanity was thinking. Dr. Rodriguez allowed herself the smallest of smiles. The Xeraxians believed they were delivering an ultimatum. In reality, they had just triggered the most comprehensive, collaborative response in human history. This wasn't going to be a conventional conflict. This was going to be a systematic dismantling of everything the Xeraxians believed they understood about resistance. The world transformed with a speed that would have been impossible just decades earlier. Dr. Yara Okoye stood in the Pan-African Technological Collaboration Center, watching as holographic displays tracked real-time information exchanges spanning continents, disciplines, and previously impenetrable institutional barriers. "We're not preparing for a traditional defense," she explained to the incoming team of researchers. "We're building a living, breathing system of collective intelligence." Within hours of the Xeraxian transmission, something unprecedented occurred. national boundaries became meaningless. Competitive research barriers dissolved. The most brilliant minds from every corner of the globe began a symphony of innovation that defied all previous expectations. In Silicon Valley, a team of neural network experts led by Jack Chen began developing adaptive communication algorithms designed to predict and interpret alien communication patterns. Simultaneously, in a research facility near Moscow, quantum physicists worked on developing materials that could dynamically respond to energy signatures completely unknown to human science. Dr. Elena Rodriguez's team at the International Xenocommunication Research Center became the central nervous system of this global effort. They had discovered something crucial in their initial analysis of the Xeraxian transmission. The alien communication wasn't just a language, it was a complex technological ecosystem. Think of it like a distributed neural network. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura explained during a global conference call that connected researchers across 47 different countries. The Xeraxians don't just communicate. They integrate communication with technological function. Every message is also a potential system command. The implications were staggering. If human researchers could understand this system, they could potentially do more than just defend. They could interact, manipulate, and potentially subvert the alien communication infrastructure. Universities became impromptu research hubs. The Massachusetts Institute of Technology converted entire engineering departments into collaborative think tanks. Brazilian climate engineers shared breakthrough cooling techniques that could potentially disrupt alien technological systems. Chinese materials scientists developed nanocomposite structures that could dynamically adapt to unknown energy signatures. General Marcus Thompson oversaw a radical reimagining of defensive strategy. Traditional military thinking gave way to a more fluid, adaptive approach. "We're not building weapons," he told his international coordination team. "We're developing a planetary immune system." Each research team became a specialized cell in this larger organism. Linguists worked alongside quantum computing experts. Neurobiologists collaborated with network security specialists. The boundaries between disciplines became as fluid as the information flowing between them. Dr. Yara Okoi's team developed the critical infrastructure, a global communication network that could process and distribute information faster than any existing system. Unlike traditional networks, this was a living, breathing entity. It could learn, adapt, and reconfigure itself in milliseconds. The Xeraxians are expecting a conventional response. Jack Chen noted during a strategy session. They're looking for military buildup, weapon systems, traditional defensive infrastructure. Instead, we're building something they won't even recognize as a defense mechanism. The global research effort wasn't just about technology, it was about understanding. Every piece of information about the Xeraxian transmission was analyzed, dissected, and integrated into a growing body of knowledge. Linguistic patterns, technological signatures, communication protocols, nothing was overlooked. Universities that once competed for research grants now shared resources in real time. Proprietary technologies were freely exchanged. The entire planet was becoming a single integrated research organism. As the first week of preparation concluded, something remarkable had emerged. It wasn't a weapon. It wasn't a defensive system. It was something far more powerful, a planetary network of collective human potential, ready to face a threat that no single nation, no single discipline could address alone. The Xeraxians had issued an ultimatum. Humanity was preparing a response that would redefine the very concept of resistance. The first Xeraxian energy wave struck Earth's atmosphere with a precision that had decimated hundreds of civilizations across the galaxy. Commander Vex 7, lead tactical officer of the invasion fleet, watched the holographic displays with the cold calculation of a being who had never known defeat. Initiating primary pacification protocol, the ship's neural interface announced in its crystalline voice. What happened next defied every strategic projection in the Xeraxian combat database. The energy wave, a weapon that had instantly neutralized entire planetary defense systems in previous conquests, seemed to simply disappear. Not deflect. Not absorb. Disappear. Dr. Elena Rodriguez sat in the underground monitoring center, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that were simultaneously tracking, analyzing, and responding to the alien assault. Beside her, Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura watched a complex holographic representation of Earth's adaptive defense network. "It's not just blocking," Nakamura muttered, more to himself than anyone else. "We're actively transforming the energy signature." The global network they had developed was nothing like any defensive system the Xeraxians had encountered. Each incoming energy wave was not just intercepted but studied, its fundamental properties analyzed, and redistributed across a planetary mesh of quantum processors and adaptive materials. Jack Chen's distributed AI system came alive. Developed through a collaborative effort that spanned continents, the system didn't just defend, it learned. Each Xeraxian attack became a data point, a moment of understanding that was instantly shared across the global research network. In orbit, the Xeraxian fleet began to realize something was fundamentally wrong. Their targeting systems showed perfect weapon deployment. Their historical combat algorithms predicted total planetary neutralization within minutes, yet nothing was happening as expected. Commander Vex 7's crystalline form began to show the first signs of what, for a Xeraxian, might be considered confusion. The ship's neural interface started producing error messages that had no previous reference in their extensive combat logs. Recalibrating primary assault vector, the interface announced, its perfect tone now carrying a barely perceptible hint of uncertainty. On the ground, Dr. Yara Okoi watched multiple global defense centers working in perfect synchronization. The atmospheric shield wasn't a traditional barrier. It was a living, breathing system that could dynamically reshape itself, absorb incoming energy, and redistribute it in ways that completely defied the Xeraxian understanding of physics. "They're treating this like a mathematical problem," General Marcus Thompson observed, watching the global response unfold. "And we're solving it in real time." The Xeraxian fleet had conquered civilizations that had centuries more technological development than humanity. They had neutralized defense systems that could manipulate gravity, redirect stellar radiation, and create localized time distortions. But they had never encountered a species that viewed technology as a living, adaptive organism. Each attack was not just blocked but transformed. Energy waves were redirected, their fundamental properties altered. The Xeraxian weapons became sources of information rather than instruments of destruction. "They're scanning us," Jack Chen noted, watching the complex data streams. "But they're not understanding what they're seeing." The global research network was doing something unprecedented. It wasn't just defending. It was teaching. Every Xeraxian energy wave became a lesson, a moment of cross-species communication that the aliens were completely unprepared to understand. Commander Vex 7 made a fatal mistake common to technologically superior civilizations throughout galactic history. They assumed that technological complexity was the same as adaptive intelligence. Humanity was about to prove them wrong. The first assault was over, and the Xeraxians had just realized they were no longer the ones conducting this engagement. Jack Chen's fingers moved like light across the quantum interface, his eyes reflecting a complex tapestry of data streams that would look like chaos to anyone else. The network he had helped create was no longer just a defensive system. It had become a living, breathing entity of collective human intelligence. "They don't understand," he muttered to Dr. Elena Rodriguez, who stood watching the global communication network pulse with unprecedented activity. "The Xeraxians think technology is a tool. We know it's a language." The breakthrough had come from an unexpected collaboration. Linguistic experts from the University of Cape Town worked alongside quantum computing specialists from MIT. Neural network researchers in Tokyo shared real-time insights with cryptography teams in Sao Paulo. The result was a communication system that was simultaneously a weapon, a defense, and a method of understanding. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura had discovered the critical vulnerability in the Xeraxian communication protocol. Their technological language wasn't just a method of communication, It was their entire operational system. Every message was a potential command, every transmission a potential system modification. Imagine their technology as a single planet-sized computer, Nakamura explained during an emergency global conference. And we just found the keyboard. The first counterattack was subtle. Instead of targeting Zyraxian ships directly, the human network began to introduce microscopic variations into their communication protocols. A single character shifted, a quantum-level signal slightly modified. To the Zyraxians, it would be like a human experiencing an imperceptible change in background noise. But in their hyper-precise technological ecosystem, it was devastating. Zyraxian navigation systems began to receive conflicting instructions. Communication relays started to produce minor, almost undetectable errors. Each ship in their massive fleet became a potential point of systemic failure. Dr. Yara Okoi's team had developed an adaptive communication algorithm that could interpret and subtly manipulate the alien technological language. "We're not breaking their systems," she explained to her team. "We're having a conversation they don't realize is happening." Entire squadrons of Zyraxian ships found their navigation systems producing increasingly erratic results. Weapon arrays would momentarily lose calibration. Communication networks would experience split-second interruptions that would be meaningless to human technology, but catastrophic to the Zyraxian system. General Marcus Thompson watched the global response with a sense of awe. This wasn't a military engagement in any traditional sense. It was a planetary-scale problem-solving exercise. They've never encountered a species that views technology as a living, adaptive organism, he noted to his international coordination team. "We're not just defending, we're learning." The human network was doing something unprecedented. Each Zyraxian technological attack became a moment of learning. Their communication protocols were being studied, understood, and subtly transformed. What had begun as an invasion was becoming a complex, multi-dimensional conversation. Jack Chen's distributed AI system was the key. It didn't just respond to Zyraxian technological attacks, it anticipated them. Each microsecond of alien communication became a data point, an opportunity to understand and ultimately redirect their technological ecosystem. On the Zyraxian command ship, Commander Vex 7 experienced something entirely new, a sensation that, for their species, was almost impossible: uncertainty. The human technological response defied every strategic projection in their combat database. It wasn't just adaptive, it was alive. "We are not fighting," Dr. Elena Rodriguez said, watching the complex data streams. "We are communicating in a language they've never heard before." The digital battlefield was transforming, and humanity was writing its own rules of engagement. Dr. Aisha Khalid adjusted her neural interface, the holographic displays around her flickering with complex linguistic patterns that would appear incomprehensible to anyone outside her specialized team. The Zyraxian communication network was more than a technological system. It was a linguistic ecosystem with its own intricate social hierarchies and psychological frameworks. "We're not just decoding their language," she explained to her multinational team of linguists, anthropologists, and communication specialists. "We're understanding the fundamental psychology that drives their entire civilization." The breakthrough came from an unexpected combination of disciplines. Xenolinguists worked alongside social psychologists. Cultural anthropologists collaborated with quantum communication experts. Their goal was not to create a traditional communication strategy, but to systematically dismantle the Zyraxian collective psychological infrastructure. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura had discovered the critical vulnerability. The Zyraxian civilization was built on an extremely rigid hierarchical communication system. Every message was simultaneously a command, a social signal, and a psychological validation of their complex social structure. Their entire civilization is like a massive planet-wide bureaucracy, Nakamura noted during a global strategy session. And bureaucracies have one fundamental weakness: they can be paralyzed by confusion. The first psychological counterattack was subtle. The human communication team began introducing microscopic variations into the Xeraxian communication protocols, messages that slightly challenged existing hierarchical assumptions, communication patterns that introduced the slightest hint of doubt into their decision-making processes. On the Xeraxian command ships, something unprecedented began to happen. Junior officers started to question standing orders. Communication relays began to produce responses that didn't align with standard operational protocols. The perfect, machine-like precision of their communication network started to develop microscopic cracks. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the global response with a sense of cautious excitement. "We're not attacking their physical infrastructure," she explained to General Marcus Thompson. "We're challenging their fundamental understanding of communication and social order." The team had developed a series of communication algorithms designed to exploit the Xeraxian psychological vulnerabilities. Each message was a carefully crafted piece of linguistic art, seemingly innocuous, but designed to introduce the smallest seeds of doubt into their collective consciousness. Jack Chen's adaptive AI system played a crucial role. It could generate communication patterns that were simultaneously complex and subtly destabilizing. Messages that would pass through their communication filters, but introduce microscopic variations in their decision-making processes. "Think of it like a conversational virus," Chen explained to his team. "We're not forcing a change. We're creating an environment where change becomes inevitable." On the Xeraxian command ship, Commander Vex 7 experienced something that had never happened in their species' documented history: uncertainty, doubt, the slightest hint that their perfectly constructed civilization might not be as infallible as they had always believed. Dr. Yara Okoye's team had discovered something remarkable about the Xeraxian communication system. It wasn't just a method of exchanging information. It was their entire social and psychological infrastructure. By introducing subtle variations, they were essentially redesigning the alien civilization's fundamental communication framework. The psychological warfare wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. "We are having a conversation," Dr. Aisha Khalid said, watching the complex linguistic patterns dance across her displays, in a language they don't even realize exists. The Xeraxian civilization had conquered hundreds of worlds. They had neutralized civilizations with technological capabilities far beyond most species in the galaxy. But they had never encountered a species that could turn communication itself into a strategic weapon. Humanity was rewriting the rules of engagement, one carefully crafted message at a time. The moment of transformation began so quietly that most would have missed it entirely. On the Xeraxian command ship, a series of microscopic changes started to cascade through their entire technological and communication infrastructure. Commander Vex 7 first noticed something was fundamentally wrong when the ship's neural interface began producing response patterns that deviated from standard operational protocols. The changes were so subtle that they would have been imperceptible to any species less attuned to absolute precision. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the global monitoring systems with a sense of cautious anticipation. The human network had become more than a defensive system. It was a living, breathing entity that was systematically dismantling the alien invasion without firing a single traditional weapon. "We're not destroying their technology," she explained to General Marcus Thompson. "We're fundamentally reimagining how technology can interact with itself." Jack Chen's distributed AI system had become the symphony conductor of this unprecedented engagement. Each Xeraxian technological system was being transformed from within, its own communication protocols turned into channels of strategic redirection. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura had discovered the critical insight. The Xeraxian technological ecosystem was so perfectly integrated that it had become its greatest vulnerability. By introducing microscopic variations into their communication networks, humanity was essentially teaching the alien technology to question its own fundamental assumptions. On multiple Xeraxian dreadnoughts, navigation systems began to produce increasingly erratic results. Weapon calibration protocols started to generate conflicting instructions. Communication relays developed unexpected interference patterns that defied their species' understanding of technological precision. Dr. Yara Okoye's team had developed a communication strategy that was simultaneously a defensive mechanism and a form of interspecies dialogue. "We're not just responding to their invasion," she told her multinational research team. "We're having a conversation they don't even realize is happening." The global human network was doing something unprecedented. Each Diraxian technological attack was being transformed into a learning opportunity. Their communication protocols were being studied, understood, and subtly redirected in ways that challenged the very foundation of their technological assumptions. General Marcus Thompson watched the planetary response with a sense of awe. This wasn't a military engagement in any traditional sense. It was a planetary-scale problem-solving exercise that was redefining the concept of technological interaction. They'd never encountered a species that views technology as a living, adaptive organism. He noted to his international coordination team, "We're not just defending, we're evolving." The Xeraxian command structure began to experience something entirely foreign to their species: uncertainty. Their perfectly constructed technological ecosystem was developing microscopic fractures that were spreading with exponential complexity. Dr. Aisha Khalid's linguistic team had discovered the critical vulnerability in the Xeraxian communication system. Their technological language wasn't just a method of communication, it was their entire operational infrastructure. And humanity was rewriting the rules of that language in real time. Commander Vex 7 experienced a sensation that, for their species, was almost impossible to comprehend. The slightest hint of doubt began to penetrate their collective consciousness. Their invasion, so meticulously planned, so perfectly executed in countless previous conquests, was becoming something entirely unexpected. "We are not fighting," Dr. Elena Rodriguez said, watching the complex data streams transform before her eyes. "We are communicating in a language they've never heard before." The turning point wasn't a moment of dramatic confrontation. It was a subtle, systematic transformation that was fundamentally reshaping the entire concept of technological engagement. Humanity had become something the Xeraxians could never have anticipated. Not a civilization to be conquered, but a living, adaptive system that could transform any threat into an opportunity for understanding. Sarah Martinez stood at the Global Coordination Center, her fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. The massive screens around her displayed a complex network of interactions that looked less like a military strategy and more like an intricate living ecosystem. "We're not just neutralizing their invasion," she explained to her team of interdisciplinary researchers. "We're teaching them an entirely new way of existing." The human response had evolved beyond any traditional concept of defense or counterattack. Hijacked Xeraxian ships were no longer simply disabled. They were being transformed into complex learning platforms. Each captured communication channel became an opportunity for cross-species understanding. Dr. Elena Rodriguez watched the global network pulse with unprecedented activity. The distributed intelligence they had created was doing something remarkable. It wasn't just defending Earth. It was systematically dismantling the Xeraxian invasion strategy by reimagining the very concept of technological interaction. Jack Chen's adaptive AI system had become the central nervous system of this unprecedented engagement. Ships that moments ago were part of an invading fleet were now becoming conduits of a profound technological dialogue. Their own communication networks were being repurposed, their technological infrastructure turned into a massive planet-wide learning experiment. "Every system has a language," Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura noted during an emergency global conference. "We're not just speaking that language. We're teaching them how to listen." The Xeraxian technological ecosystem began to experience something entirely foreign to their species. Their perfectly constructed invasion protocol was being systematically transformed from within. Communication relays became channels of understanding. Weapon systems were being recalibrated into platforms of dialogue. Dr. Yara Okoye's team had discovered the critical insight. The Xeraxian civilization was so technologically integrated that it had become its greatest vulnerability. By introducing adaptive communication protocols, humanity was essentially offering the invaders a completely new way of experiencing existence. General Marcus Thompson observed the planetary response with a sense of profound amazement. This wasn't a military engagement. It was a species-level conversation that was redefining the very concept of technological interaction. "We're not destroying their technology," he explained to international leaders. "We're helping them evolve." The global human network was performing an unprecedented transformation. Each Xeraxian technological system was being studied, understood, and subtly redirected. Their communication protocols were being transformed into channels of mutual understanding. Dr. Aisha Khalid's linguistic team had developed communication algorithms that were simultaneously a defensive mechanism and an invitation to dialogue. Messages were crafted not to antagonize, but to illuminate, not to destroy, but to transform. Commander Vec 7, aboard the primary Xeraxian command ship, experienced something completely unprecedented in their species' history. The invasion, so meticulously planned, so perfectly executed in countless previous conquests, was becoming something entirely unexpected. The human approach defied every strategic projection in the Xeraxian combat database. It wasn't about defeating an enemy. It was about offering an alternative way of existing. Sarah Martinez watched as entire Xeraxian communication networks began to reconfigure themselves. What had begun as an invasion was becoming a profound moment of interspecies communication. Ships that were designed for conquest were being transformed into platforms of mutual understanding. "We are not fighting," Dr. Elena Rodriguez said, her voice calm and clear. "We are having a conversation that will fundamentally change how technological civilizations interact." The final strategy wasn't about destruction. It was about transformation. Humanity had become something the Xeraxians could never have anticipated. Not a civilization to be conquered, but a living, adaptive system that could transform any threat into an opportunity for collective growth. The silence was more profound than any sound Dr. Elena Rodriguez had ever experienced. The Global Coordination Center hummed with a quiet intensity, screens displaying the transformed Xeraxian fleet. No longer an invasion force, but something entirely different. Commander Vec 7's communication request came not as a surrender, but as a request for understanding. Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura leaned closer to the primary communication interface, his decades of sinolinguistic research converging on this singular moment. "They're not asking to be defeated," he whispered to Sarah Martinez. "They're asking to be taught." The global human network had done something unprecedented. Instead of destroying the Xeraxian invasion force, they had fundamentally transformed it. Each ship, each communication channel, each technological system had become a platform for cross-species dialogue. General Marcus Thompson reviewed the final strategic assessment with his international coordination team. The numbers defied traditional military understanding. No traditional weapons had been deployed. No physical destruction had occurred. Yet an entire invasion fleet had been completely neutralized. "We didn't just defend ourselves," Thompson explained. "We demonstrated a completely new approach to interspecies interaction." Dr. Yara Okoi's research team had discovered something remarkable about the Xeraxian technological ecosystem. Their entire civilization was so tightly integrated that it had become both their greatest strength and their most significant vulnerability. By introducing adaptive communication protocols, humanity had essentially offered the invaders a new way of experiencing existence. Jack Chen's distributed AI system continued to process the unprecedented interaction. What had begun as a defensive network had become a living, breathing platform of interspecies communication. The AI was simultaneously analyzing, learning, and facilitating dialogue. "We are witnessing the first true moment of galactic communication," Dr. Aisha Khalid noted during a global conference. Her linguistic team had been instrumental in creating communication protocols that went beyond simple translation. They were about fundamental understanding. The Xeraxian command structure was experiencing a complete philosophical transformation. Their entire civilization, built on centuries of technological conquest, was being challenged by a species that viewed technology not as a tool of domination, but as a platform for mutual understanding. Sarah Martinez watched as the first genuine communication exchanges began. It wasn't a negotiation of surrender. It was an invitation to understand. "We're not just sharing information," she explained to her team. "We're demonstrating a completely different approach to technological and cultural interaction." Dr. Elena Rodriguez reflected on the journey. Humanity had been presented with an ultimate threat, and had responded not with destruction, but with an unprecedented offer of understanding. The global network they had created was more than a defensive system. It was a living, adaptive platform of interspecies communication. The Zyrexian fleet, once a symbol of technological superiority and conquest, was being systematically transformed. Each ship became a learning platform, each communication channel an opportunity for mutual growth. General Thompson noted the most remarkable statistic: 0 physical confrontations, 0 traditional weapons deployed. An entire invasion neutralized through pure communication and adaptive intelligence. "We didn't just save ourselves," he told the assembled international leaders. "We potentially changed the entire paradigm of galactic interaction." Dr. Hiroshi Nakamura understood the profound implications. This wasn't just a defense against an invasion. It was a demonstration of a completely new approach to interspecies communication. Humanity had shown that technological superiority wasn't about destruction, it was about understanding. The final message was clear. Earth was not just another potential conquest. It was a civilization that could transform any threat into an opportunity for collective growth. As the first genuine dialogues began between humans and Zyrexians, something remarkable was becoming evident. The real conquest had never been about physical space or technological superiority. It had always been about understanding.